So, we're about to explore one of the biggest what ifs of the 20th century. I mean, really think about this. What if the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, hadn't died just 1 year after its creation? How would the destiny of a nation, and really the entire region, have been completely different? Jinnah's death in September 1948 wasn't just the loss of a leader. It was one of those moments that, just like this quote says, truly changed the fate of a nation. So let's trace the ripple effects of that single event. Okay, so to really get the impact of his death, we first have to understand the sheer chaos of Pakistan's birth. This wasn't just about gaining independence, it was about survival, right from day one, and a vision that was just getting off the ground. The challenges were just staggering. You're talking about over 7 million refugees flooding in, an almost empty treasury, and basically no established infrastructure to speak of. And yet, even in the middle of this storm, a foundation was being laid. The fact that they established the state bank within a year, that shows a nation fighting like hell to build itself from scratch. And this timeline really shows you just how compressed that whole foundational period was. You go from the euphoria of independence straight into the crisis of partition, then to this landmark achievement of opening the state bank. And then bam, just 2 months later, the founder is gone. That last public appearance really marks the end of an era before it even had a chance to begin. And that sudden loss created an immediate and devastating problem: a leadership vacuum. This wasn't just about people being sad, it was a massive power void that this young, fragile state was completely unprepared to handle. You can see the tragic domino effect right here. With Jinnah gone, his trusted prime minister, Liaquat Ali Khan, is the only real figure of authority left. But that just puts a huge target on his back. His assassination, only 3 years later, completely shatters what little political stability was left and just plunges the country into a decade of chaos. And this single number, it just says it all. 9. 9 years. Let that sink in. For nearly a full decade, the country was just running without a foundational rulebook, without a constitution. This wasn't some simple political delay. It was a symptom of a deep, deep paralysis that set in because there was no leader with Jinnah's stature to command respect and, frankly, to get things done. So this brings us right to the heart of it, right? What if he had been there for those 9 years, and maybe even longer? How might the political DNA of the country have turned out completely differently? This is probably one of the most critical points. That political vacuum of the 1950s is what directly led to the military stepping in, thinking, the civilian leaders have failed. It's almost impossible to imagine that happening under Jinnah's watch. His personal authority was so immense, his commitment to the Constitution so strong, he would have cemented the principle of civilian supremacy right from the get-go. The other huge shift was ideological. Under Jinnah, the vision for the state was more like a guiding light, a lantern. But after he died, for a lot of people, that ideology got twisted into a political weapon, a sword. There's a famous story that illustrates this perfectly. So, a religious scholar sees a woman just flying through her prayer beads, and he asks her what she's reciting. She says the Ayatul Kursi, which, is a long and very important verse from the Quran. He's totally baffled. So the scholar asks, how on earth could you shorten such a sacred verse? And her answer, well, it reveals everything you need to know about the political climate that was taking over. She had reduced the holy verse of the throne to just the word for throne, kursi. This story became this powerful metaphor for how these deep spiritual principles were being hollowed out for a crude political power grab. This is exactly the kind of weaponization of faith that a strict constitutionalist like Jinnah would have fought against with everything he had. Now, moving beyond domestic politics, Jinnah's presence would have dramatically changed how Pakistan positioned itself on the world stage, especially during the height of the Cold War. In our timeline, Pakistan pretty quickly aligned with the US-led bloc, but Jinnah's vision was different. He seemed much more interested in creating a third bloc of Muslim nations, a powerful, independent force in the world, maybe even with its own currency. Plus, his fierce opposition to the partition of Palestine suggests he would have been a much louder, more assertive voice on that issue globally. Okay, so this brings us to what might be the most important and maybe the hardest to measure impact of Jinnah's early death. It wasn't just about policy or politics, it was psychological. There's this concept called a psychological rupture. Basically, when a brand new country loses its founder, the one person who symbolizes its identity and its stability, it creates this deep crisis of confidence. The institutions are just too new, they're too fragile, and the people haven't had time to really internalize what the nation is all about. And then suddenly, their anchor is just gone. And this table just lays it out so clearly. Look at the time other major founders had to work with. Ataturk had 15 years to completely reshape Turkey. Nehru had 17 years to see a constitution written and to oversee 3 successful elections, really embedding democracy in India. Jinnah? He had 1. Just 1 year. He never got the chance to turn his blueprint into a fully built, resilient structure. And this gets to the absolute heart of it. It's about more than just governance. During big crises, like India's war with China in 1962, Nehru's presence provided what one writer called a psychological assurance, a feeling that someone was steering the ship. This is the steadying presence that the people of Pakistan were deprived of during their most vulnerable years. And that's exactly what those extra years would have given them. Not just different policies, but a constant, living, breathing reinforcement of the rule of law. Every decision he made would have been another layer of that psychological assurance, giving a brand new, fragile nation the confidence it desperately needed to weather any storm. So that leaves us with this big, lingering question. It's a testament to a nation's resilience that it can survive without its founder. But what we've seen here is how the long shadow of that leader's absence can shape its destiny for decades to come. What could have been? Well, that remains one of history's most fascinating questions.